go public. And maybe, do you want to go ahead and give your presentation, Jakob, and then we can go to Stephanie and then open it back up for general discussion?
I would just suggest the reverse. I had the discussion with Stephanie ahead, and it's okay for you, Stephanie, to start, isn't it? Yeah, please.
Great. I will. I just have 2 slides, so I'll share my screen. Sorry, my computer is also a bit slow, so if you would bear with me for just a moment. Okay. So, not having known in advance what Jakob would be discussing, I thought up 2 ways to bring Whitehead and process philosophy into productive conversation with a few of the major themes of this group. The first concerns, the potential virtues of speculative philosophy, or the sort of Whitehead's emphasis on the need for speculation for the growing field of multi-species studies. And the second concerns what Whitehead elsewhere calls objective immortality, which is a topic he discusses a bit indirectly in the chapters we read from in Modes of Thought. And actually, we've been talking about it a bit already during the discussion. And in particular, the possible merits, limitations, and dangers for ethics and politics in an age of extinction, right, of this idea of objective immortality. So Whitehead, and you'll have to forgive me because I can never remember anything when I'm on the spot, but there is and I'm sure I know this, I've known this for 10 years, there's a very famous, ancient Greek philosopher, I can't remember if it's Heraclitus or who it is, says, right, you can't step into the same stream twice. Right? This is philosophy of becoming, and Whitehead says, well, actually, yeah, that's true, but it doesn't go far enough, right? There's not even the same walker. So not only is the stream always becoming, but the subject, which is a tricky concept in Whitehead, right, is also always a series of becomings. What is for Whitehead, what exists are these occasions of experience, actual occasions. He gives them a couple of different names. I think actual occasions, occasions of experience, I think, are the terms he uses in this text. And so, right, so a subject is this aim at novelty, and it is a process of concretion, of the coming together, and it is a particular way of taking up data, right? So taking up a particular set of available data in a particular way, and then that's the end of the subject. That's it. Then the subject becomes object, and it becomes available to be taken up by others in the future. But the fact that it then becomes immortal is what's interesting to me, and what I hope we can discuss. Okay, so I will start, however, with speculative philosophy. So readers of Whitehead love to talk about what he calls the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And it's a good one. It's very interesting. Perhaps some of you have heard of it. I think Donna Haraway has something similar. But I have always really loved, maybe because it's a kind of goofy, what in the epilogue of Modes of Thought, Whitehead terms the fallacy of the perfect dictionary. I will read it to you. Whitehead says, there is an insistent presupposition continually sterilizing philosophic thought. It is the belief, the very natural belief, that mankind has consciously entertained all the fundamental ideas which are applicable to its experience. Further, it is held that human language in single words or in phrases explicitly expresses these ideas. I will term this presupposition the fallacy of the perfect dictionary. To me, as I read it, there's a lot packed into those short sentences, but for our purposes, I want to focus on how, according to Whitehead, this fallacy, in his words, divides philosophers into 2 schools. One he calls critical, the other speculative. Connected to the speculative dimension, and I think really ethos of Whitehead's philosophy, is how it breaks down many of the dualisms we know from von Plumwood, among others, to be 1, dangerous obstacles to ecological thinking and acting in a more than human world, and two, to structure by means of a denigrated notion of nature, a variety of what Plum would call conceptual oppression. So those based on concepts of gender, race, class, and so forth. And so Whitehead's metaphysics, and I think it's connected, the speculative dimension and the manner in which he breaks down many of these dualisms. I'm not sure I would say all of them. That could be something to discuss further as well. But anyway, this is why I find Whitehead's work so compelling. We read a few chapters from Modes of Thought in a graduate seminar on the philosophy of social science I recently taught, which I approached experimentally and with the hope of identifying modes of social inquiry best able to conceptualize and respond to what seemed to me to be some of the key conditions in which many of today's social problems are set. Among these conditions are, of course, our multiple entwined ecological crises and ongoing histories of imperialism and colonialism. Also included among the readings for the class were a few essays in multi-species studies, including one co-authored by Evan. So one topic we might discuss is what I take to be a rather interesting fit between Whitehead's approach to metaphysics and the aspirations of multi-species studies. I'll give a brief example quoting from a different text, Process and Reality. Whitehead says, "The true method of discovery is like the flight of an aeroplane. It starts from the ground of particular observation. It makes a flight in the thin air of imaginative generalization, and it again lands for renewed observation, rendered acute by rational interpretation." And here I cannot help but think of Anna Singh's wonderful, I think it's Acts of Immersion, Arts of Inclusion, I think it's Acts of Immersion, and of the value attributed to anecdotes on the part of so many scholars in this field, right? Whereas anecdote is traditionally almost ridiculed and certainly dismissed as not a valid source of knowledge within so many methods in the social sciences. So to think and experience differently, we of course also require new methods and new methodologies. And I happen to find, it seems to me that there's a productive conversation to be had between these two traditions. I mentioned a bit ago that Whitehead's metaphysics breaks down key dualism, so mind and matter, nature and culture, but also subject and object. He writes somewhere that rather than superjects, we should think in terms, rather than subjects, we should think in terms of superjects. A process philosopher, Whitehead endows processes of multiple sorts with subjectivity. It's the processes that are the subjects. They are subjective in and of themselves. This is the idea of aim, right? That is intrinsic to his notion of life. This also means that Whitehead cuts short the subjective life of an event. So after the aim, after the concrescence, the subject is completed, and it doesn't quite die, but it's no longer, right? It's no longer in process. It's no longer becoming. And he does this to give greater priority to processes, to becomings. Doing so, endowing what he calls subjective immediacy with immortality. The eclipsed subjective experience now becomes an object, lives on, and is in a sense revived in the comings to be of new entities. What is divested, this is Whitehead, what is divested of its own living immediacy, Whitehead says, becomes a real component in other living immediacies of becoming. Indeed, the eclipsed subject, continues to exert an influence upon the direction of the earth or the universe. I'm going to quote again, "The actual entity as self-creating creature passes into its immortal function as part creator of the transcendent world." As Isabel Stengers explains objective immortality, when the many that are, this is tough, when the many that are what is felt, the feeling and the feeler have come together into a real unity, the actual entity that now is no longer feels, no longer is a subject. It is added to the many that will have to be felt by other subsequent entities. The many have become one and are increased by one. And so my question is, and I can stop sharing my screen, to me, especially at a time of mass extinction, when we think about and really sort of rapidly accelerating climate catastrophe and ecological catastrophes of all sorts, the question of death and disappearance and loss are on, I don't know, certainly on my mind all the time. And so how does thinking about the ability to it's almost like what you could call like an imminent immortality, right? Rather than a transcendent one that is imminent, that continues to exist and continues even to exert an influence on the way that things unfold after it itself has perished. What are some of the merits, dangers, limitations of this understanding for so much of the work that I think a lot of people here are doing? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Maybe just one quick response. First, thank you, Stephanie. That was a masterful unraveling of some of these key ideas. And that idea of an imminent immortality was very much part of Bateson's philosophy, and I think you see it elaborated. You mentioned Plumwood. Also, I'd point to Deborah Berg-Rose, the ecofeminist anthropologist, who talked about death as becoming, but also in contrast to that, the double death that she describes as a condition of late modernity, where the aspiration is to take the human body outside of these chains of regeneration. So if death is normally an intergenerational gift to the futures of others, the form of death that at least morticians and biomedical establishment types might aspire to is a death of stasis, a death of embalmed substance. But she also talks about, on an ecosystem scale or a planetary scale, how these chains of double death are unraveling life-giving worlds in important ways. Do other folks have thoughts or comments before we turn to Jakob? All right, Jakob, take it away.
Okay, I would like to make some preliminary statements. And Whitehead used to be a mathematician, and I think he was quite acquainted with modern physics. And there is quite a distinction between the potential of theoretical physics as compared to the potential of theoretical biology. In theoretical physics, with a lot of apprehension, probably one of the best ones is Einstein. You can really make statements that can be validated often decades later, when the machines become good enough to detect those particles. And this is not possible in biology, because biology is way more complicated than physics. I shouldn't say that to a theoretical physicist, because I don't understand it, but it is a fact. I mean, there is no. In physics, determinism still plays an important role, but in biology, whatever we modeled, it was disrupted by some external event that made predictions hardly possible beyond a few days or a few weeks. That's the first preliminary I wanted to make. And then what was so appealing to me was actually the deconstruction of a static reality by Whitehead. This was very appealing to me, and was also a big change in my own thinking. And there I was very much influenced by an anthropologist, a medical anthropologist, Brigitte Obrist, who told me, but Jakob, a tribe is not a tribe. A tribe is changing all the time. An ethnic group is not something static. And that was a huge learning for me. And so with these few preliminary thoughts, let me walk you through my story with Whitehead, which actually is heavily influenced by theologians. First of all, the first introduction to process philosophy was because of a book on the desk of my wife, who is a Protestant theologian. And then I gave this class. You can see it, I guess, or I hope. Let me just make full screen. You can see the slides?
Yes, fine.
This class, I give it together with Reinhold Bernhard, who is a systematic theologian at the Faculty of Protestant Theology at the University of Basel. And my journey actually starts with the One Health theory, where we state that whenever we want to do multi-species studies, we have to demonstrate an incremental benefit of doing so. And this incremental benefit can be health, or it can be financial savings. And this requires a deep understanding of the interconnection between humans, animals, and the environment. But that is not sufficient. I mean, I have this stringent aspiration of One Health to produce an incremental benefit, because only then we can prove to disciplinary scientists that it makes sense to do interdisciplinary research. That is my experience. So let us take a simple example of a dog-human rabies transmission model. Don't worry, I will not go into the mathematics, but this symbolizes the green letters are susceptible dogs, latently infected dogs, and in infectious rabies dogs. Rabies virus is also an RNA virus like corona, and it is transmitted through the bite to a human who becomes eventually exposed. That's the Y status. And already here we are in a dynamic reality, because this flowchart symbolizes a dynamic reality of transmission, which is not a static situation, although you have a status vector that is composed of all these symbols here, of these big letters, but they are changing all the time. And first of all, this is a time series to which we fitted a deterministic model, and the striking feature is that this model perfectly describes the animal-human transmission. Intuitively, you see that the blue line doesn't really match the spiky events. So these spiky events are on the bottom left, the weekly numbers of rabid dogs that we observed in the capital city of Chad, in Jamena. And on the right side, the number of exposed humans. So already from this diagram, you see that reality is not deterministic. It is very spiky and unpredictable. But that's not the first conclusion. We return to that. The first conclusion is that we don't look only at the human. We look really at the dogs and the humans. And we don't look at the dog alone. We look at the environment and the natural environment as such. So we clearly have to move away from a pure Cartesian reference of an anthropocentric perspective, considering animals as machines. I don't mention what he said about women, but what is important, and I think this is also a point of departure of Whitehead, is Descartes, even in that chapter, isn't it? So we ask ourselves, where are we going in an extended perspective, a post-humanist perspective that does not only put humans in the center of attention, but humans in their environment. And that has a lot of consequences on the humanities as such. If the humanities, if sociology doesn't only remain sociology, but becomes socio-ecology, for example, or if the anthropology has only an anthropocentric perspective, but includes also the environment in its thinking. So what helped me a lot is also a text by Poser about science philosophy. I don't think it is translated into English. It's called Wissenschaftstheorie in German. But he made a very important statement that without meaning, we are no longer human. And that matches very well with Whitehead's emphasis on apprehension beyond positivism. I mean, Whitehead's fundamental critique of positivism. So now we go even one step further. We don't stick only to the narrow dog human system. We go into a complicated human environmental system. This is the flow chart of antimicrobial resistance surveillance. I think I showed this in an earlier talk in this seminary. And here clearly we cannot easily understand the linkages. We see that it becomes complicated, and we cannot at one instance grasp everything in such a flowchart. But that is also not the meaning. But if you would model such a relatively simple dynamic system, you could come into what we call deterministic chaos, because in certain parameter constellations, the system would not converge to stability. If you multiply a matrix many times, normally you get to an eigenvalue, to a stable condition. That's what you see here. But if you choose the parameters beyond a certain value, you get into a chaotic behavior. And here, what I want to say is that when things become more complex, then we can no longer address them properly with deterministic thinking. And I think here, intuitively, process thinking becomes very appealing, and it became very appealing to me. And that's what I actually want to say. Determinism is no longer sufficient to face the complex reality of human environmental systems. And returning again to Descartes, this two streams of rationalism and empirism, which were really driving the positivism against which Whitehead criticizes, requires that deeper look into Whiteheadian process philosophy. I would just like to relate it also to evolutionary theory and general systems theory, which grew in parallel, I would say, with Whitehead's own thinking. The evolutionary theory, of course, came with Darwin, but the evolutionary theory grew very, very strong in the middle of the 20th century. And then complexity or systems theory, that really came after the Second World War with Bertalanffy. So these are parallel streams of thinking that we may keep in the back of our mind. So here he is, what we see also in this chapter that we were looking at, Whitehead really is against these dualistic concepts. He really thinks that body and mind are united. And I think this is also very close to Jewish thinking. In Jewish thinking, there is no such separation of body and mind. And then the important thoughts about causality, an upward causality and a downward causality, and also the idea of emergence as a process whereby new self-creating events can happen out of antecedent phenomena. So what I find also very interesting in Whitehead is the structural aspect. In that chapter if you go on page 7, if you go on page 5, he mentions these 6 types of occurrences. Here they are structured a little bit differently in anorganic and organic levels. And if I go to current social ecological thinking, we have also stratification from the molecule to the ecosystem through populations, body, tissues, and cells. So this is very close to the process thinking of Whitehead. So what Whitehead emphasizes also in this chapter is prehensions, that I had to translate this into German to understand it properly. Prehension is in German would be begreifen, erfassen. So when this is where Whitehead really goes a step beyond positivism, that he says, while we are seeing a phenomenon, it is not just a phenomenon, we have apprehension. We cannot otherwise than trying to explain it or trying to give a meaning. And that contributes to the causating phenomenon. And then we have the actual entity that has also initial aim. And this is better explained here. So the prehensions are causations through antecedents. And then we have the causation through self-creation out of the entity as such. And we have a final causation. To give an example, the causation through antecedents is really what makes a plant grow. A plant grows also on its own. It has its DNA that drives actually the growth of the plant. I currently grow salad, and they all almost died because the weather became very cold in the last days in Basel. But I had covered it in a greenhouse, so I could save them. So I admire every day the growth of the salad. It's unbelievable how it unfolds, a salad. And that's actually this inner dynamic of a plant. And ultimately, the plant will grow seeds and die eventually. That would be the final causation of the plant. And here we come actually touch a little bit Stephanie's immortality notion, because that plant will create seeds who continue that life somehow. And that touches at least a little bit on your notion of immortality. So I try not to be too long, but for me, this was very appealing to have this causality notions, because I am dealing in epidemiology with causality using the notion of risk factors, for which we can say how probable it is to have a disease from a certain risk factors. But these are only statistical conclusions, and they are not deterministic as such. There is always an uncertainty in making such statements. So if you imagine then many of these entities that interact, here comes the dynamic understanding of reality, and also Whitehead's notion of a social reality, of the social reality, isn't it? So my initial reading was actually from Ian Barber, Religion and Science, who was an excellent summary of Whitehead, but then went also into process theology. Maybe on a later stage, we could have also such a process theological dialogue. I'm currently reading a very, very interesting book on cooperation that is written by an evolutionary mathematician, Martin Novak, and Anglican theologian, Sarah Coakley. Maybe we can come back to that. But for today, I would just like to show you now the similarity of contemporary systems biology that is structured in these different levels, from the molecule to the population, and also here again, and also where I would like to go is Elinor Ostrom's notion of the social ecological system, which is an important foundation for current research that we are doing in developing a game theoretical approach to One Health, and also to health in social ecological systems. Here we become very economical, but also very mathematical. But this helps very much in understanding decision processes, but also in understanding sustainability. I mean, we are speaking about mass extinction, but how can ecosystems become sustainable? And here I would argue that Elinor Ostrom plays a very important role, because she criticizes Hardin's tragedy of the commons. She argues that although we see that natural resources are currently destroyed, Elinor Ostrom has examples of communities that are able to manage their natural resources in a sustainable way. And for me, this is one of the ways out to find a future beyond mass extinction, that we get into a sustainable balance, into stable social ecological systems. This is where I want to go also with my research, to use Elinor Ostrom's earlier thinking of governing the commons. I think I stop here. This is what we coined the health in social ecological systems, considering health as an outcome of complex social ecological systems, which is for me very much in line with Whiteheadian philosophy. I think I close here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob. Really interesting, as usual, to engage with your work. I found so many things in there provocative, and the apprehension moment was also one that I was puzzling over in the text. Christina, do you want to have the first response, since you're the sharpest critic of? No, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't have anything to say, but
well, I did not read Whitehead, so I'm not very much prepared this time. Yeah. But
fair enough.
I don't really understand this stratification, maybe.
Well, yeah, you see it here on this slide. We have molecules, and then we have a higher level of organization is single cells. And Whitehead actually distinguished this level of the protozoa, the single cell entities, which are made of billions of molecules, but these can be self-sustaining entities. And if single cells join to organs like a liver or a heart or a lung, they reach a higher level of organization, but also of, I would say, of being. And what is crazy is that is organs cannot live alone. The organs, a lung needs a heart and needs a kidney, or otherwise it wouldn't work. And then we have, of course, the individual body of a human or of a mammal animal, or any animal. Even a mosquito is a brilliant creature. And then we get into the level of populations, where we have a future entity, where we have the social dynamics. So this is this stratification that Whitehead actually postulates and emphasizes.
And how was that associated with freedom? You had this line that was going up on the side.
Yeah, I mean, let us start with inorganic materials. A stone can at best fall down. So the potential of a stone is fairly limited. But already a plant has an incredible potential of self-manifestation, of growing. If you look the growth of a plant with a camera that is accelerated, it looks like a snake. I mean, it moves around and finds places for the roots and for the leaves and so on. And so life apparently, or the world is apparently structured in entities that have more and more degrees of freedom, that have a higher and higher potential of activities. And
actually, on that point, I thought I'd jump in. So I found a certain human exceptionalism latent in Whitehead that I'm not sure I personally agree with. So, you know, you accounted for the 6 types of occurrences in nature. This is on page 214 to 15. The human existence, body and mind. The second includes all sorts of animal life, insects, vertebrates, and others. 3rd type, vegetable life. 4th type, living cells. 5th type, large-scale organic aggregates. 6th type, happenings on an infinitesimal scale. And later he's talking about the social habits of animals having evidence of flashes of mentality in the past. We just had a new member join our household yesterday, a slime mold. And on page 229, he's talking about the most obvious example of conceptual experience is entertainment of alternatives. And if anyone's seen some of these images of slime molds that are entertaining alternatives of, you know, when you give it a maze and 2 oats, it'll look at all the different possible pathways to the maze and then settle on the one that's kind of the quickest path between the 2 oats. And just having the slime mold and, you know, trying to explain it to a 5-year-old and reading this bit about, you know, mental conceptual life being the entertainment of alternatives. I mean, I think he was a bold thinker for his day, but I think there is a latent human exceptionalism that privileges a certain kind of body and mind and embodied existence. So I don't know what you think of that, Jakob or Stephanie, but I found these texts to be invigorating, but also I wanted them to kind of go a little bit further with in thinking about mentality and mind.
I go back and forth on this myself with him. Humans are definitely not the be-all end-all for Whitehead. Like, you know, we will be like, not just we, but everything that exists as it exists now will no longer exist as the universe marches on, and what he calls, you know, sort of creative advance towards novelty. So I don't think in that, to me, that tempers a little bit a kind of human exceptionalism. But I tend to think the emphasis on conceptual thinking and on entertainment of alternatives is kind of bound up with this idea of creative advance towards novelty. and maybe with a little bit of, I don't want to call it optimism because that's such a clunky word, but I sometimes want to call it providentialism. But I think he is unsure of it himself, and so I think sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there. But I get annoyed at those moments too. For what it's worth.
Yeah, because it seems like in some places his idea of mentality is not at all, human mind kind of mentality, but these distributed, what Bateson would call, mental systems. You see that the seeds of those ideas in these texts, but then there's these other moments where, the evidence of flashes of mentality in the past implies that, there's kind of this haunting of a previous moment, but not an actual living agentive being that's becoming with others in the world. Do you have any final thoughts, Stephanie or Jakob? We're kind of at the hour. Need to boogie here pretty soon. And I might ask Julieta to give us a teaser. So you're on deck for next week. Do you have any teasing thoughts? You're muted.
I know. I mean, like mostly I'm revisiting, like rewriting something which I will send you in a couple of days if all goes well here, on the living extinction and on like capsized futures and so on. But yeah, it's
great.
It's being kind of like rewritten now, so should be in your inboxes in a couple of days.
Great. All right, Jakob and Stephanie, thank you so much for coming back. Really great to have you both back. Christina and others, if you're joining for the first time, definitely there's a button on our webpage where you can subscribe to the Google Groups if you want to get the weekly notifications, or you can just email me or Rachel. So thanks again. Good to see everyone. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Stephanie and Jakob.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.